Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dad Designer podcast. Today, I'm joined by Alxndr Jones. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going well. So, why don't you tell folks a little bit about where you're from, a bit about your design background, and some about your family?
Yeah, for sure. I am currently based in St. Paul, Minnesota, very proudly. I've been in Minnesota for the last 15 plus years. I moved up here for school from Northeast Iowa and just absolutely fell in love with it. So it's great. I've been a working designer for probably the last 15 years or so, and it's fantastic. I've had kind of a weird background of I was in advertising. I worked for a small studio. I worked in-house at General Mills. I worked for a couple different nonprofits. And in between all of that, I took a detour into the craft beer world and became a assistant brewer, brewed some like cool award-winning beers, opened a brewery, did all the branding, stuff like that for that. And then was kind of tired of carrying around bags of grain and was like, all right, had some different views and was like, let's go back to design. I kind of miss doing that full time, but I've always been doing design and illustration for, as long as I can remember. Yeah, I'm in, like I said, in St. Paul. I love it. It's my wife and I, and then I've got a almost 5-year-old. She will very proudly remind you that she's almost 5, and then she'll be 6, and then she'll be 7, and then she'll be 8, and then she'll be 9, and I cut her off there because I say, that's no, you're never growing up. That's not how that works. Not at all. But yeah, it's great. Love being in St. Paul. Love just making rad stuff and being a dad. Yeah.
Very cool. It's fascinating that you had a foray into the brewing world. I feel like beer cans and spirits are the new record label.
Yeah.
Like everyone aspired back in the day to design a record cover, right?
Right.
And
Right.
now it's like if I could design a craft brew label
Right.
be on the shelves, like that's the pinnacle of like the thing that you want to design. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. No, it's cool because like being in the craft beer world, it was one of those like would start to become not numb to it, but like, oh, okay, gotta make another label, gotta do this other thing. But it never wore off like looking on social media or going to the liquor store or like all of that kind of stuff, like seeing it out in the world. And I think that's true for like every designer is like you can work on something a million times. You can design a million band t-shirts, but like every time you see it in the merch stand, you're like, I did that. That's super cool. And
Yeah.
like no matter what, it's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I like doing craft beer stuff was super, super fun. I still occasionally do it. I've worked with a couple breweries just like from a design standpoint alone. And it's still something that like every time I get to do it, I'm like, this is so cool. And with my background in commercial brewing, there's a little bit of that too of like, oh man, I know the literal like blood, sweat, and tears that went into this and like the passion that went into making this thing. How can I honor what's inside this package with what's on the outside? And I feel like as designers, we do that a lot. Like that's kind of a lot of us, our main goal is like, how can we support this cool vision or this cool thing visually and make that look as great as the mission, as the product, as, whatever XYZ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you kind of got out of that world. Was that around the same time you had your daughter?
My kiddo she was had just turned 1, I think. So right after she was born, opened the plate, like opened this brewery that I helped with and do branding and whatnot. And yeah, so she was just over a year old. So that was like late nights at the brewery and like build outs and whatnot and that kind of thing. And through that build out, my daughter's mom and I got divorced. And so that was just like another big stressful thing. But yeah, so kind of everything within a year period was like a lot of big life changes of becoming a
Mm.
dad, opening a business, leaving a business, getting divorced, like I made the big move from Minneapolis to St. Paul, which is just across the river and that kind of thing. So it was like a whirlwind for, a year and a half there, almost 2 years that just like everything in my life changed. But as a parent, as soon as you got a kid, everything changes anyway. So I figured why not throw it all in a box, shake it up, and see what happens.
And then, I mean, most of the work that I've seen you post, either on your Instagram or on your portfolio site, it has a distinct style,
Mhm.
very illustrative, like rough lines and things like that. Is that work that you're doing for clients, or is that like your thing that you're building on the side, and then like you do regular design work for like marketing clients and whatnot?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. Most previous like in-house job, I was working for a running nonprofit, doing brand work and marketing materials for the different events that, definitely were not my illustration style. But as I've grown as a designer, more and more people have reached out to me for those types of designs. There's a project that I did last year that was doing kind of big brand work for a race in called Around the Crown in Charlotte. And they reached out to me. They're like, "Hey, we love your style, and like we want you to just like blow this out." And that was kind of cool and like a kind of weird, still another weird thing to get used to. It's like, hey, you don't want just like something clean and crisp or just like something that looks nice, but it's like, hey, we like what you do that. Do a lot more of that. Like make us a whole brand that's around this, and we can do cool stuff like t-shirts. And I pitched Hawaiian shirts, but we ended up not making them, which was kind of, I think I'll probably still get to do that at some point. But it was like doing that stuff and got to do another beer label and like all this sort of stuff, that it was a lot of things coming together to create a cool project. But a lot of times, it's as a freelancer, you're kind of doing whatever. Sometimes it's like super your own style. Sometimes it's right along a brand guidelines. Sometimes it's just, hey, we need this turn and burn kind of thing.
Yeah,
But yeah, I found a lot more people reaching out to me because of the type of work that I create and put out there and want to make more of.
right. And how long, like over what period of time did you develop that kind of look?
That look developed when I was in art school,
Okay.
but not as my style in art school. When I was going to art school, degree in illustration, I was doing a lot more like collage kind of stuff and like digital collage. And it was super fun stuff. And I really liked how it all turned out and looked. But the way that I make art now and illustrations now is much more based on the sketches that I was doing back then. That I thought like, oh, here, this is kind of how I would roughly sketch, and kind of some incomplete lines and just some like weird things all over the place. And after art school, I was looking back through old stuff and I was like, I really like how like loose this feels, or like how, yeah, loose, a little more personal feeling. Like, so let's see where this goes. And been doing that for how many years now. And I find that like it's a fun challenge to think through how can I simplify stuff into these like lines and shapes and that kind of thing. But it's been a fun thing to kind of explore. It's kind of old albums, like you were saying, album artwork. There's a bunch of like old jazz albums that that were illustrated by Ben Shawn and David Stone Martin, two like amazing illustrators that have this really cool um, graphic, loose line work kind of style that really grabs a lot of energy and puts that into these static illustrations. And so I just got hooked on that and was like, oh my gosh, they're drawing faces a weird way that I draw faces. Like, how can I do more of that? And just seeing that it was, um, yeah, something that isn't so out there that nobody's gonna like it, but out there enough that it's interesting and different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you went to school for illustration. How did you make the transition from that into like a design type role? Did you take design classes at school and naturally go that way, or was it like this is where the money's at, so I'm going to go like figure out these design tools?
Yeah. Um, I was originally in a different design program at a different college,
Got it.
that they like only kind of had a design department. And I was like, oh, well, I'll go up to design school. And I went to school originally to pursue design. And then they kind of were like, oh, well, if you like drawing pictures, do illustration because it's like fine art, but you get paid. Come find out that's not necessarily true. So I kind of went back into the design world more strictly with like brand work and that kind of thing. Just a little bit out of necessity and a little bit out of like, well, I don't know. I like drawing these illustrations. I'm going to keep doing that. But like, yeah, I can not a lot of places are hiring a senior illustrator, but like
Hmm.
a senior graphic designer or a designer, like that kind of thing. It's like, yeah, I can still use the knowledge that I have in composition and color in that kind of thing, but I can also tap into those like the stuff I know about typography and layout and and all of that stuff. Yeah, it ended up being that I love doing illustration, needed to do design work just like to pay the bills, and it's kind of come together. And like I call myself like an illustrative designer, that like I definitely lean more into illustration, but I think they're so intertwined that that you can kind of find bits of it in each different type of thing.
Yeah, you're the reason that people think that all designers are illustrators.
I know. I realize that. I've got another buddy locally who's another like illustrative designer, and he puts out amazing stuff, and I love it. And I look at his stuff, and I'm like, oh man, like if he makes me feel like every designer should be an illustrator, then it's like I'm not helping that at all, because like I'm in the same camp as him of like, yeah, let's make a brand, but also we're gonna make all these like cool icons, but not just icons, but like full on illustrations and like these big graphics. And it's like, oh yeah, that's that's uh that's not how everybody works.
Yeah, yeah. There are so many in-house teams where they'll be like, "You can do this, right?" I'm like, "No, no, no. I can art direct and illustrator to get us there."
Right.
But my level of illustration, I don't remember. It's probably 2015, 2016, where like the very flat, long
Yeah.
shadow, and I was like, I can do this because I can take basic shapes and make characters or you know cactuses or like whatever it is out of these basic shapes. So like, am I an illustrator? Not really, but I'm capable of using the tool Illustrator to get there.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've
And
got
then
the knowledge.
as
You
yeah,
can do. You can get point A to point B. Might not necessarily be the most pretty, but you can make something happen.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't the challenge there is like brands became so similar
Oh yeah.
because it was like, oh, our design team can do this style of illustration, which is really popular, and therefore everyone's homepage, their banner image looked the same because it was like just a bunch of
Right.
copies.
Oh yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. It's interesting to see, and I mean, you see that in anything, in food, in music, in fashion, whatever. That like the trends and how those trends kind of come up, kind of take over everything, and every brand looks the same, and then kind of comes back out, and it's like, oh, okay, the ones that like it really made sense for them to be these flat vectory illustrations, that sticks around because it's like, oh, that's really core to the brand and the brand feel. Whereas the other ones are like, oh, you just needed something, and it doesn't make any sense for you to be playing in this world. It doesn't go back to a why or a core aspect of your brand.
Yeah. Yeah. How broad does your illustration ability go? Like obviously there's the stuff that we see on your site, but then if you were to be embedded on an internal team and they needed a specific style, could you play into that style because you have the skills to do that as an illustrator?
I feel like yes and no.
Okay.
That like no matter what my illustrations look like, I made them. Just like I have a way of drawing eyes and faces that like no matter if I'm trying to do really realistic or more simplistic or whatever, a style that's a big like thick line kind of thing, or a really like painterly or whatever, there's just ways that I do things. I think every designer probably had, not every designer, but like I feel like a lot of designers, it's probably a similar thing that's like, oh, there's a way that you like really treat a problem, that like you're always going to go to, I need like my first solution is going to be making a badge because I know how to do that and I know that's good. Cool. But then how can you push that a little bit further? And so I can, my illustration style, there's definitely a style I like doing, or a couple different styles that I prefer to do. But I love jumping around and trying stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, oh, you can still tell that like Alexander did that, and I'm a okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you find, now that you're a little bit more independent, how do you find the people to help push you past that initial idea?
I've got a couple industry friends that I've stayed friends with for a long time, that if I'm really struggling, I'll shoot them a text or just be like, hey, is this a weird idea? Is this going somewhere? Is this not going somewhere? And then a couple like non-industry friends too. I found a lot of good feedback from that. One of my best friend works in publishing. He lives in Michigan, and I'll send him stuff and be like, hey dude, do you think this makes sense? Or like, I know you know nothing about this project, what are your initial thoughts? So that's kind of fun. But then my wife also, she's creative. She's she's just got an amazing mind, thinks through stuff like logic and process, all this sort of stuff. And I love showing stuff to her as well. It's like, hey, check out this thing that I made. Do you like, I think it's missing something, or do you think this is too much, or that kind of thing. So yeah, getting feedback and connections with non industry things, I think is, for me, has been really helpful, because you want to make something that's not just like other designers are like, oh, that's super cool, but something that's like, oh wow, this like solved the problem, and this is something that a wider audience is into and interested in and can appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's cool. Other aspect I want to talk about is a little bit about your unique situation in parenthood. We were talking about it a little bit before the call, but you did mention earlier you're divorced, your daughter is with your first wife, and share a little bit more about like what that's like as a dad, as a designer. How does it impact your work and your life and all that kind of stuff?
for sure. Yeah, it's wild. My line that I've said over and over again is like, I didn't really know if I ever wanted to be a dad. I still don't know if I want to be a dad, but all I want in the world is to be my daughter's dad. That like I wouldn't say I don't care about anything else, but like that's my number one thing. I want to be her dad. But yeah, it's an interesting situation, kind of co-parenting and sharing time with a kiddo. And my wife and I, we acknowledge that we live in this kind of cool duality of being parents and at the same time not having kids. We so we can go out to a show on a Tuesday night and we don't have to get a babysitter. We can go on some like different trips and travels and that kind of thing, and it's just the two of us, and we are able to take time and really recharge together individually, that kind of thing. And that gives us the ability to pour into time with my daughter even more so, that it almost makes both things more precious, and we're able to show up better to both things. I know that like it's like it could be kind of controversial that like, oh man, we get this time to recharge, and like, oh cool, we just had the kiddo for the weekend, that was amazing, we got to go 100% like full bore playing, going wild, adventures, all this sort of stuff. And totally acknowledge that like people that have their kiddos full time don't necessarily get that day or even an hour to like recharge. So just it's a weird and wild thing. It's kind of I'm a pretty optimistic person, and it's kind of the bright side that I've had to take from getting to see my daughter every day all the time. But since that's not the reality that I live in, taking that opportunity and taking the time not with her to really recharge, work on things that I want to work on, and just create stuff so that I have the ability to be in a good place to completely focus on her and her growing up and our little family. Yeah, it's a weird duality that my wife and I definitely acknowledge is a weird duality and a weird reality to live in, but it's ours, and we get to kind of make it however we want to make it.
I appreciate people that take situations that can be very challenging and turn and look for the positives and the optimism in them. And so I appreciate that perspective a lot. How has your daughter impacted, influenced, inspired you when it comes to what you do? I'm sure there's a portion of it where it's like you pour everything into your work so that when you do have time with her, you can be fully present. But what are other ways that she's kind of influenced that aspect of your life too?
I mean, we've got a lot more children's books around, so definitely that's a big influence. Just things that I'm seeing, but also like, I don't know. I want to make things that she's excited about, and she's almost 5, so like not super excited about things that I, as a 37-year-old, am very excited about. But just like I was working on a project, and the illustration was this like cool kind of punk rock unicorn. And I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta show this to her. And she was just like, Dad, you made that? That's so cool. And then it inspired her. She was like, I gotta go get my markers. I gotta go do this. And like, we'll play in my sketchbook together. She gets up early like I do, and we'll sit in the living room, have some coffee, and just I'll draw stuff, and she'll color it in, or she'll just be like, "Dad, I got an idea," and she'll just make stuff, and it's super fun. So like that's been a big aspect, and then just like not taking myself so seriously with my work. I think for a while I was like frustrated that I try to do this kind of tattoo punk rock style kind of thing. I was like, I just feel like it's not like hardcore enough. Like it doesn't look like it's punk rock. And my wife the other day was like, well, yeah, it's kind of like PG punk. And I was like, that's a good point. This would be great like on like kids clothing, or, a fun like, yeah, punk rock kids thing or whatever. And I was like, yeah, you know what? This is my style. Like I'm not this like big serious tough dude. Lighthearted, jokey kind of goofball. So why not embrace that? And my daughter, she has definitely reminded me of just the goofiness of life and just being authentically silly. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Like I've been drawing a lot of tattoo eagles mixed with like pizza, partially for like some freelance work, but also partially because I was like, that just sounds rad and kind of fun. And I showed that to her, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, there's pizza!" Like, so it's definitely like gotten me, helps me stay excited about work and
Yeah.
not, like I said, not take it too seriously. Just a reminder of like, yeah, just being authentically silly, authentically a goofball. Because like, why not? The world's a wild place. Why not have a little bit of fun? And like the reminder to do that.
Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like sometimes when I see my kids' drawings, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, man, I wish I had less knowledge
Right,
to think like that doesn't look realistic. Because
right,
I'm like, yeah, that's actually way better than the thing that I could have drawn because it's so imperfect.
right.
And yeah, I think that's some of the designer in me trying to perfect everything, pixel perfect kind of stuff. But yeah, I love the organic quality that our kids are also able to bring.
Definitely. Yeah, there's been things that she's drawn that's like there's no way that a giraffe would look like that, or like an elephant. Or she the other day was drawing like a mountain scene, and it was like just the most ridiculous thing. And I was just like, that's not correct. And I was like, I mean, correct, but like, yeah, like that freedom, like you don't know. I think you said it perfectly. Like you don't know any better. Like you don't know that like, oh, a dog's legs actually kind of stand like this, and that's how you make it so it looks like it's solid there. And you're like, no, that dog looks like it's having a ton of fun chasing a ball that's not very spherical. Like that's rad. Yeah, just that reminder of like not overthinking stuff and not thinking too hard about things, and just having fun. Like I said, like that authentic silliness of like that a kid has in like everything they do, whether it's on purpose or not. It's like kids are just kind of funny, and so it's
Yeah.
yeah, just embracing that.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the questions I've asked, I think I asked the first guest, and I was wanting to ask everyone, but when you said this earlier, it made me think of this, and I haven't asked it since the first episode, which is you mentioned children's books being like a big part of your house right now, and I'm curious if you have a favorite, whether it's a favorite children's book illustrator or particular children's book.
Man, there's that's a good question because we do have just a ton. But the books, it's always funny. You get like these really beautifully like John Clausen illustrated children's books, or more old school like Eric Carle and that kind of thing. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But then, and I mean no shade with this, but like my daughter right now loves this just like Winnie the Pooh storybook. And I'm like, you have these award-winning, beautifully illustrated like collage pieces or woodcut, all like these amazing things. And yeah, we'll read the Winnie the Pooh story again of Tigger's moving day and why take a nap, because that's what we're excited about right now. I feel like there's a lot around, but I don't get to explore it as much. But like John Clausen, yeah, 100% is somebody that I really like. Keith Negley as well. They're making cool stuff, and it's interesting. That is different but approachable. Yeah, they're just cool stuff
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're just about at that time where I ask you the last two questions, which are, as a parent, what has been your greatest parenting success? And then what has been your greatest parenting failure or learning?
For sure. I'll start with the negative so we can end on a good note. I would say the failure is giving into distraction. I feel like, all of us in the world are easily distracted by our phones and whatnot. But I catch myself, in I only have finite time with my daughter. The fact that, share custody and she's not here all the time, that, I find myself like stuck on my phone or distracted or whatnot. And it's like, no, I need to be more present, not just because we don't have a lot of time together, but because also in the scheme of things, we don't have a lot of time together. That, she's growing up, like I said, she's 5, but she's going to be 6, and then she's going to be 7, then she's going to be 8, then she's going to be 9. It's like, yeah, there's not a lot of time, so why spend it looking at a phone or distracted by something else? Yeah, so that's the thing that, like, I catch myself, or my wife and I catch ourselves doing that, and it's like, nope, that's like pour into that finite time, and so that she's always reminded, like, no, you're important, you have value, you are what matters right now. Like, we're playing with blocks, we're playing with unicorns, we're playing with whatever. Like, yeah, that's what we're doing. Like, you're important, I care about you more than anything. So yeah, definitely guilty of that. And I think, hoping that can get better at that and that kind of thing. And then success, my kiddo is such a creative little kid, and I love it. She loves to write, she loves to change colors for every letter that she's writing, which means thank you notes and notes to the neighbor take like 4 times as long as they should. But she's got a plan and she's creative and excited about it. She's super caring. She loves hanging out with other kiddos, especially ones that are younger, that she can kind of like run around with and show them the way. But then she also loves following her older cousins around and like, oh my gosh, we just get to play, and like all these like cool creative things. She makes characters out of things that aren't characters. We were at my parents' house a couple weeks ago, and there's like this plastic like drum, and there was drumsticks on it, and there was toys everywhere. And she decided that what she wanted to play with was these 2 drumsticks, and they now had personalities, and we're doing it like that kind of. It was like, you're just creative. You just want to play. You just want to create little stories. You just want to make all these things. So I think, I don't know if that's a lot to me or my success or my wife and I's success in fostering that, but like just trying to have a place of creativity. And she's such a creative, inquisitive, caring kid that just like, yeah, it's so cool. And I can't wait to see how that continues on and how she can take that creativity and authentic silliness into the future. If that's following me in the design world, if that's following her stepmom in nonprofit, if it's going into some sort of medical, like whatever. How can she? I hope that we've fostered this like space and this core belief of creativity and exploration and just kind of fun. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all about your work, your family, and if folks wanted to follow you online or find some of your work, where can they do that?
Yeah. On almost any platform, if you search a vintage thought, one word, that's me. I've done a pretty good job of snagging that on absolutely everything. But yeah, on social, on like Instagram, it's underscore a vintage thought. My website's avintagethought.com. Yeah, that you can kind of find me there, and love connecting, love just seeing rad stuff with cool people and expanding the network and people that we know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Alexander, and it was a good chat.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.